Thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. I was about to do something else, as I kind of point out later on in this video, but in looking for a couple scenes that I wanted to create, I came across this half-page composition that I did in some previous video. I take it was probably a stamp sketching video, and I thought, I want to, this one looks like one that I want, might want to color, so I did in this one. And it's springtime here, this time of year, and I thought there's plenty of meadow space to do, a lot of these little gel pen wildflower types of little dots in here. It looks kind of crazy, doesn't it? When you look at it, close up like that, it's almost too much, but this is general, that's the viewing distance of it right here, so it kind of blends in a little bit more from a a visual standpoint. So anyways, just kind of a coloring, general coloring exercise, and no real experimentation done in this one, but a lot of fun. So if you choose to watch the video, hope you enjoy it. And as always, thanks for tuning into the Stampscapes YouTube channel. Okay, I was going to do a different scene right now, but in trying to find something on my desk, I came across this composition. It was probably from a previous video, I don't remember, and I don't remember what it was from. It might have been using this covered bridge, but I'm not really quite sure. But anyways, I like the layout. It's a half-page layout, and I thought I would play around with this a little bit. See what I can come up with, and, I don't know, just do some kind of a quick coloring job. Well, I don't know how quick it'll be. Relatively quick in terms of it being such a, relatively large piece in terms of creating cards. I don't know if you'd call this a card or more than a scene, but I don't know. Let's play around with this a little bit and see what we can come up with. Now, this is one of those instances where, the layout is, for the most part, complete. I can add some more stamps in here, but usually it's a little bit more of a oscillation of kind of a stamp and coloring or media application that I'm doing. I usually stamp some things out, color in, add some more stamps, but this one's more of kind of a stamp sketch where I was, kind of experimenting around with image placement in, a pretty complete layout here. And this is just going back and coloring it in. So, I mean, like I said, I could go back in and add more to it, but I think we'll just, kind of leave it as is and just do more of a coloring job on it. Okay, so I'm applying some antique linen dye-based ink, distress ink, and I am adding this on the road. I'll add it on my background hills and on the covered bridge itself. We'll make it, covered bridges are often painted, but I'll just get this tone laid out here, because whatever colors I bring into this in the color scheme that I'm thinking about kind of like an early spring type of thing. This is supposed to represent snow on the top of here, but I don't know. Maybe, most of that is going to be melted off on the area down here. I'm not really quite sure. I'll figure something out here. But, I don't know. I was thinking about with all this kind of open space back in here, there's all these wildflowers kind of happening all around the state here, California, but in a lot of the neighboring, states where we got a lot of rain this year. A lot more than, what we're kind of used to. We probably got an average, amount of rainfall, but I don't know, in the last, decade or two, it seems like that average is really kind of decreased by a considerable amount. But anyways, there's a lot of wildflowers going out off in the hills and on the high deserts, low deserts too, but the high deserts, which I'll be taking a look at this weekend. And I thought I would get some kind of a spring statement down, especially the last scene that I did was, you know, kind of a deep winter one on the previous lesson. But anyways, I'm kind of establishing some lights and darks in here. You know, I've left some areas light. This ink is a little bit dry, so I'm kind of spreading it around as much as I can. You don't have to do a perfect application of it. I'm kind of just getting some down on these different zones. Okay, so we have some land, here's some dirt right here, here's some wood, and in the background there's those mountains. I'm just kind of establishing a little bit of a, I don't know, kind of a lighting scheme by retaining some of the lighter areas. Maybe it's not just straight the white of the paper. Well, in some areas there's a little bit, I'll get a little bit down here, but I'm just using a little bit more ink in some areas than in other areas. So it gets darker just from the sheer coverage and, you know, amount that I'm using of this given ink in that area. Alright, so that is that. Again, antique linen. Yeah, I think the tea dye is going to be too light. I don't think that would matter at all. Okay, I have to dig down here into my memento pads. The pad that I want is always at the bottom of the stack here. Let's go for this desert sand. I have all my pads kind of laid out on well, they're not laid out, they're just kind of stacked in piles on my desk here where I can kind of see the color a little bit. I guess the distress inks, they don't have the, you know, some sort of sticker on the side that would be helpful. But, oh, here's a peeled paint. I'll use some of that. But let's try this desert sand here. This desert sand memento. It's going to be fairly light. I don't know if you'll be able to tell on camera anything that's happening. But it's also kind of a nice thick hue, or thick ink in terms of its viscosity, rather. And memento inks really spread very nicely. I really like the consistency of them. That being said, they're kind of so thick and they spread nicely because they are thick that sometimes if you add several layers of it, sometimes it's hard to apply like that, you know, that fourth or fifth layer of that ink on top of it because it is so thick and built up on the surface of the paper. But it's a really nice consistency. I'm working on glossy paper here, but you can do this on matte too, like a matte cardstock, something that's not going to be so absorbent. So kind of a coated paper would be probably easier than a non-coated paper, but something nice and smooth is something you can do this with. Non-coated papers are really going to absorb the ink off of whatever applicator you're using a lot faster, so it's so much easier to use a coated paper, at least in this type of effect here. When you're using a non-coated paper or something that's not quite as smooth, then you can use pastels or colored pencils on them, you know, with great effect. Okay, so adding this around. I kind of added it in roughly the same areas that I had added the antique, was it the tea dye that I used? I can't even remember. That being said, you know, if I can't remember, you know, it's not real important, you know, in terms of, you know, being so specific. I'm just adding, I don't have some kind of color scheme in mind or formulas. I'm just kind of sticking with a general color scheme, okay? And anything that's kind of close to it, I just kind of work into the mix. You know, if one thing goes dry and I don't know, I don't think to repurchase it again, you know, I can just make do with my other ink pads. Now, if, let's say, someone doesn't have a collection of pads, I don't have a lot, you know, relatively speaking. Some people have hundreds of ink pads, and they have all kinds of brands and lines, and if I got around to stores more often than I do, I probably would have all that too, because when I see them I want them. But I don't know, something like this, you just mix and match. I don't have to use the sheer amount of different colors, you know. I just I don't know, I would mix and match. Or you can color blend too, like say if I didn't have certain greens, if you had yellows and blues, you can kind of mix those together or overlap them in this type of process here, because these types of inks, dye-based inks, are all transparent, so you can really kind of extend the use of your pads in achieving different hues by simply overlapping them with each other, if you know kind of some of the basics of color combinations, you know, especially with your primaries. Yellows and blues make greens, and yellows and pinks or reds make oranges, blues, reds, you know, pinks, get into your violet color schemes, okay? Alright, this is the walnut stain again, if I didn't mention that. You can kind of see a little bit more of a range of hues, or not hues, but a range of values starting to be established here. And I realize it is all, you know, brown right now, but this is kind of my base coat, my my base layer that I'm going to establish here. I used to do this with oil painting classes that I took. You kind of, a lot of times if you're starting with a completely white blank canvas, you know, you kind of gave it a wash of some tone, you know, even if that you wouldn't really retain any of that, but it would be this kind of base coat. Even it would be like a warm layer of something like this, even if your, you know, end up painting was going to be, say, blue. Sometimes, you know, you'd have this warm base layer, and that would kind of give your blue tones that you would eventually, you know, see and would dominate the composition with. That blue would have a different feel to it, because, you know, if you're working washes and transparency as opposed to, like, you know, Van Gogh and with, you know, thick, you know, what is it, you know, layers of super thick paint. I forgot what technique they called that. But if you're working washes, you know, you can see this kind of, you know, through the transparencies, this kind of warm glow coming through, and it would make the those tones seem really rich. Okay, this is peeled paint, so I'm going to go with the green, and I'm going to put this over my landscape in the back, you know, my hilly area, and we'll give it this kind of warm green tinge, okay? And we'll have some more greens in here too. Okay, so this is just a start. You can kind of see that tinge. See that right there? I think it's a fairly rich look right now, and we just added one green. I'll add a lot more in here. Brighter greens and darker coming up. And see where this kind of grass transitions into this more brown road. I'll just kind of designate some kind of area in here, and you know, there's not going to be this kind of this real definitive cutoff, like where this is green and then it suddenly stops and that's brown. Okay, I have kind of have it transitioning over a little bit. Okay, I haven't forgotten this area in here, but that's going to be blue. I didn't want the brown in the blue area, although you could, but if I did, I would do it in a very light shade. But let me test something out with that as far as that goes first before I do that. Okay, so there's my greens. It's kind of a nice rich palette, you know. It's starting to convert from, you know, this kind of very dry, arid setting to a little bit more of a plush, kind of a live one. Okay, all right. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, let me go into my memento. Oh, here's a bamboo leaves. Okay, I'm just grabbing all of my greens that I, you know, as I scan my working area here. All right. Light, medium, darker. All right, so let's start off with the lighter one. I don't know what this is going to look like. You know, sometimes I don't use a lot of these colors, but if you have them, you know, if you want to try it out, give it a try, see what it looks like. As long as you're kind of working in the same kind of color family or hue, you know, go ahead and give it a try. See if you like it. If you like it, then add more. Okay, that was the pear tart. Let's try the bamboo leaves. Looks like a kind of an olive looking version of green. Okay, now it is getting a little bit darker, so I am going to kind of tweak my application method a little bit. Maybe I'll use the side of the this applicator here. If you're using brushes, then maybe use a smaller one. I don't know. Just play around with it. But there are areas within the scene that I've stamped out. These black little areas that are kind of represent shadows. So maybe I'll just go, you know, and reiterate that with the color. So I'm not just coloring this whole thing in uniformly. I'm now working with the shadows that are in that space. Okay. And see, it just adds more variety doing it that way than just addressing that whole thing as one stationary thing. You can do all kinds of different things. You can do like a masking like this and add, you know, variation like that. Then you kind of move it over here and add that up like that. You know, just something to vary the surface a little bit. You can do that, you know, just free form, or you can use, you know, something like that mask. Let's see. There could be undulations kind of in the surface there, or it could just be, lighting, you know, or certain things are in shadow, whatever. Just as long as there's a little bit of variation, I think it, you know, can really kind of add some nice variety into that given surface or, you know, specific objects. Okay, down here in this is the Waterside Bluff left, kind of down at the base of them, right in here, you can see a little bit more dots, okay, and shadows. So let's do this. Let's add some more shadows into those areas. So all I'm doing is I'm just reiterating what's on the surface right here. You don't have to know anything about lighting. If it's dark on the image, the way that I've drawn it, okay? It's a good starting point. This is not a rule, but if it's dark in a certain area, then what you do is you just make that area a little bit darker. It doesn't mean to make it dark, it just means to make it darker. It could be a light color, too, that you're doing it with. See, like that? So it makes it look a little bit more volumetric, right? It looks rounded. You're turning it in space by not doing the whole thing the same way. Well, how do you know where to do that? Because it was darker right here and right there. So I just added a darker edge to it. Okay, things like here's some trees. Maybe the trees are casting a shadow, so I'll make that area at the base of the trees a little bit darker. Because like my hand here, you know, I don't know, I have lighting coming from, but see how that shadow's down here? If you have a tree here, then put things in the shadows right there. So here's some trees right here. Let's just kind of make the area right underneath those trees a little bit darker. And suddenly they're kind of affecting, in terms of lighting, that given spot. Right, so you can see that kind of that surface. It's kind of starting to come around, isn't it? You know, in terms of variation. And it's a little bit more interesting, I think. All right, let's try, let's see, cottage ivy. I don't even know the names of these colors. But it is a dark green. Where do you put this? You just do it in the same kind of areas that you just did with the previous colors. Maybe use a little bit less. I don't know. Just going to be a little bit more selective with the placement of your darkest tones, okay? Unless it's like a nighttime scene or something like that, where so much of it is dark. But you can see kind of the surface becoming a little bit more defined. Look at that, I darken those shadows even more. Let's kind of create a little bit of a delineation between these grassy hills in the background, mountains right here, by making that kind of horizon line a little bit. Well, it's not really the horizon, the end of the top of the hill, I guess, grassy hill. Okay. Anyways, can you see what that brown did in here? I mean, it has a different feel. Let me see. Let me grab a piece of kind of scratch paper. And we're working with cottage ivy right now. And it's a nice color, okay? But this is what the color would look like right here, okay? Let's add a pretty good saturation of it. Okay, that's a pretty decent thick saturation of it, but here is the difference here. You know, between that cottage ivy over here, in this area, you know, in the darkest of areas. But look at that. This is kind of flat and dull, isn't it? And this is kind of deeper and, I don't know, richer, for having all of these other tones laid out underneath it. Okay? You can leave some variation in here with some lights and whatnot. But, I don't know. So much more deep and vibrant and complex, I guess, than just going in straight. That's why I don't rush to these other colors, you know, these darker tones. You know, build up your, kind of establish your, I don't know, establishing tones first, because they're not a lost cause. If you don't have enough of those ones laid down, or enough of, it doesn't have to be a lot of different colors, okay, or different versions, but get a pretty good saturation of them down. Now, if it still looks kind of not very lively by the end result, then just go back in and add the lighter ones right back over these darker ones, okay, and do another kind of glaze of them, you might say. And it will kind of establish more of a stronger brightness and potentially visual interest. Okay. All right, that is that. So you can see I haven't, you know, forgotten about these mountains. These mountains need to be addressed now. The cabin too, you know, but let's start off with these mountains first. Okay, let's go with kind of a bluish gray, maybe. Or maybe Purple Mountains Majesty, right? Let's go with this London fog. Now there's a little bit of blue in here, but I plan on using blue anyway. I don't wash these out very often. Sometimes people will ask me, well, okay, I saw this pack of 5 wands, you know, there's 10 tips because it's, you know, these are two-sided, but sometimes people are thinking, well, what do I need, you know, 5 for? I can use these. Well, I mean, you certainly could, but like if you had 1 tip like this or 3, then you can wash them off every time you use them. You certainly could do that, and a lot of people do. But I usually just leave these sitting around. I don't even bag them up because I'm doing this often enough where I use them. But, you know, you can have one kind of tip designated for, you know, a general hue. So this one will be my blue one. I have several blue ones because I have more than 5 here, but that's me. But, you know, you really don't have to clean these off every time. You can kind of leave them sitting around, or you could just throw them in a Ziploc bag, and whatever ink you have on there stays a little bit more moist, or for a longer period of time. But that's what someone asked me. I think it was out in Arizona. And they said, well, how many, like, daubers do you have? Someone that was standing there, and they said, oh, okay, well, I have a different color for each one. And it's like, well, this is kind of the same concept as far as that customer is telling the other one. And the other one said, oh, okay, I get it. So see, that's my answer for, my excuse for not cleaning everything off, too. Because I'm kind of lazy when it comes to that. I just feel like stamping. I wish I didn't have to clean off my cluttered desk here. I wish it was just kind of magically done. Although I do like it when it's kind of cleaned off and tidy. I could find things easier. Maybe that's when I start cleaning things off, when I start, you know, being able to find things as fast as I want to. Okay, so this is adding this gray, but like I said, it does have some blue in it, but it's coloration. But you can see these areas on my mountain where there are shadows kind of drawn into the design. Just go in and reiterate that, and maybe leave the lighter areas light, okay? I mean, that's the easiest way to kind of approach them. I do have color, you know, in other areas. I don't just color in only the shadows. I'm kind of giving it an overall tone. But on some of the peaks, I might want to leave them just kind of white, you know, the light white of the paper. Okay, now, you wouldn't think to do this all the time, but I'm going to bring this down into certain areas. Okay, now in my water, I'm going to bring some of this. Okay, this is when I'll start addressing some other areas. Okay, now I'm doing this gray because it does have some blue in it down on my water, but I would do that anyway, okay? When you bring in, okay, some of these grays up here into my grass and trees and road here, it's bringing some sort of continuity and connection or whatever with other areas so that they don't look so fragmented. So I have some browns in here, 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 and here. Now I'm bringing some grays in all these different areas, but instead of going to, you know, the greens up here in the mountains, it just shares in common the brown, okay? Now it shares in common this gray and whatever blue kind of, remained in there. It might not be quite so obvious, but I think it, you know, kind of, there's an overall harmony when you share certain things. You don't have to do it so obvious. Now, see, I love kind of having a little bit of a tinge of bluish gray down here in the road, like that. Is that right there? Here's white here, okay, so you can tell. So you can see a little tinge of a bluish gray right down in here. And that will match with the mountains in the background. Okay, now let's see. Let's do something with our sky, okay? Let's bring in some tones up there. Okay, I'll bring this grayish tinge. And maybe I'll have a little bit of light on the horizon there. So maybe I'll leave it. I'm starting to get really inky fingers. Is it the name of a stamp company or something? Sounds familiar. Inky fingers. Okay, so there's our tone up in the sky. We have it in our mountains around here. A little on the rooftop too, just so it's not so stark. Oh, let me put, one of the things I forgot to do is I forgot to hit that area in there with some grass, so you should be able to see some green in that background, right? Okay, let me see. Let's hit it with a little bit of this pear tart first. I switched back to my other tip here that I was using for the greens. Okay, and bamboo leaves, and cottage ivy, seems like you can use a little bit more of that brown back in there too. It's not matching up enough. I didn't use enough of some of the, oh, let's see, the distress peeled paint. I love that green. Okay, that peeled paint did the trick, I think. You can use, you know, a little bit more tone as well, which I'll do. Okay, did I use walnut stain? I don't remember. Alright, I might need to switch tips. Let me see if I have a tip that I used. This has black on it, I think. Looks like a black man brown. I'm sure I used brown, then I went over to black, but let me just squeeze this out a little bit. Okay. There's that. Let's use some of this walnut stain here on the road. What I'm doing right now is, see this, how dark this got over here in terms of some of the values? Well, I'm going to match that a little bit with, in this space here on this road, so let's try to bring some of this. Doesn't mean color in the whole thing, I'm just kind of hitting some of the shaded, you know, areas or the shadows. A little more of that. See how that kind of warmed things up, and it kind of matched the intensity over here too in terms of overall brightness. Remember, brightness is not the same as light. Brightness is about intensity. Okay, light and darks. That's about value. Okay, light and dark, relative light and dark. So we want to match things up a little bit in terms of the value, but also with the intensity, so that this, this whole area looks connected and, of the same world in terms of lighting here. Okay, I can use some of this walnut stain on the side of the roof. Side of the covered bridge. Adding a little bit more shadows down here. Kind of anchoring the covered bridge a little bit more. Bring some of this walnut stain into this grass as well. It's a good color. Okay, kind of adding a little bit more shadow over here. Shadows at the base of these trees, maybe too. Okay, I think that looks good to me as far as that color goes. Let's take a look at... I think that's a dark blue there. Let's take a look at... let's try this Marvy gray here. I want to go a little bit darker in some of these areas in the mountain, okay? I'm going to be using this kind of more on its edge here, alright, to get into some of these more detailed areas in the mountain. Now I plan on using markers too on this scene. It's just going to be so much easier to do some of the detailed work, but in the areas that I'm going to be going for a lot more coverage, I just assume use like the sponge tip and ink, because it's just going to go so much faster that way. It's not too much darker than the Memento. Maybe my gray is really dry too, but yeah, that looks pretty good. I mean, the mountains are supposed to be farther back, so I don't want them too dark, I don't think. I'll try, I'll just make an assessment as I go along here. Something like that. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think this will be a good one here. I was checking to see if I had a kind of a real pale lavender. This is a milled lavender. I think that'll look pretty good. In theory. We'll see how it goes. You know, I'm thinking about those mountains in the background. I don't know, just giving it some kind of additional tinge. It looks a little... I mean, it looks okay, but it seems like it could use a little bit of a, you know, kind of some sort of hue. I'm just using the same tip that I used my gray, you know, with my gray. And I just add a little tinge of something. Lavender would pair well with this green, too, I think. Alright, so it's very, very subtle. There's that little tinge of a reddish, you know, tinge up there. Putting some of this rooftop here. Let's bring some of this down into this road, too. Grass. I tend to match it everywhere, you know. I mean, this is a really, really pale color, too. A pale value color. Okay. Alright. Let's just stick with that. Let's go with the summer sky. I think my summer sky is really dry at this point in time, so I need to buy a re-inker for it. Okay. Alright, that's as dark as that's going to get. It's pretty dry. But it is a very light tone, too. Let me try my salvia blue. Marvy, okay. Alright, it's wetter, well, because I have re-inkers for this one, but the color itself, too, is a little bit darker than Summer Sky. Brighter, too. Marvy inks are very bright, although this isn't a very bright tone. It's typically brighter than a lot of real pale blue pads out there on the market. Okay, a little bit more blue down in here. How about down here in the water? Leave some of the areas of the water a little bit lighter, just so you get a little bit of variation. Where you do that, it doesn't really matter, just as long as you leave some somewhere. So now it's a little bit shimmery. See, if I address this whole thing the same way, then you don't have that light reflecting off the surface. Same thing here. Okay, let's try the Bahama blue. It's a pretty bright blue. Right, before I stack up all my pads, let me grab this rich cocoa. Looks like a dark brown. Perhaps something that we could use in this scene? I don't know, maybe down here. Okay. Quite a bit brighter, right? You know, of a blue. Not that we want bright all the time, but I'm putting some streaks across in this area because I have a lot of little fingerprints up in this area up here. For my green. I don't really care about fingerprints. Some people are very, you know, particular about that type of thing. If I get a big fingerprint somewhere, I don't know. It's not something that I focus on, you know, anyway. Or anything that's going to bother me. That's with my own work. I kind of like watching things develop, and I'm not, you know, something kind of happens unexpectedly in some area. I don't you know, unless I drop a stamp or something like that and it just lands right there, I don't want that, you know. But by and large, little things like fingerprints or whatever, or something that, you know, unintentional mark happens, that type of thing has never really bothered me. I really enjoy the process of creating scenes. This is that rich cocoa. I thought maybe we can get a little bit darker down here. But yeah, everything, you know, the process should be fun in general. Now, sometimes when I'm doing kind of some experiments and testing things out, it's more, I don't know if it's considered fun, maybe in retrospect, but, you know, during that process, I might be kind of, it's challenging, you know, and it's certainly fulfilling doing that, but sometimes it's, you know, you're just constantly thinking, and that's a little bit of a different experience. And sometimes the most rewarding, and it's not because of the end result or something like that, it's just, you always want to kind of push your boundaries, you know, at some point in time. You can kind of, you know, kind of fall back into pattern too, and things that we're really familiar with, but it's really kind of fulfilling to kind of expand on your kind of your capabilities and knowledge, and in terms of this, it's your repertoire of kind of stamping or crafting or visualization techniques or processes, whatever. Okay, so let's see here. Coming around, that rich cocoa was kind of nice. It's real similar to the dark brown Marvy. Yeah. Okay. Did I use some of that Bahama Blue in my water? I'm not sure. The water's looking a little bit monotone. Okay, so let's go in here and add a little bit of a variation. Okay. Kind of adding some into those shadow areas. I'm not going exactly because, you know, those areas are very detailed in these designs. So I'm just kind of streaking here and there, kind of going along with the, you know, the way that image has been rendered. So there's a lot of kind of these horizontal little striations in here, so I'm just kind of going along in that same spirit in terms of the color application. Kind of like that, and then you get that variation happening again because I retained some of the lighter areas in that given space. So we have this variations happening with these mountains too, because I don't take the mountains, I don't treat them exactly the same over the entire surface. It's not mono value. There's several different values of colors within that given space. I guess there's a different hue up there too, with that purplish tinge that was added, and there's that base coat of some brown in there as well. Alright, so So coming around, we have some nice lighting in here. Let's go that Memento Danube blue and kind of darken these corners a little bit. Just to kind of frame off the scene a little bit more. Kind of adding this down in the meadow as well. It doesn't look Danube blue, it just looks like a deeper greenish brown or something like that over here. Same thing right here. So I'm just using it as a dark value. Okay, now, is it time, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the value vehicle that I bring everything together with quite often, maybe 90% of the time, is the same color that I stamped out my darkest imagery in. So everything was stamped out in black, so I go all the way to black. In terms of some of the shading, okay, it doesn't have to be real super dark black, but just using that same ink in various values of it, okay? You know, you can use like a very light gray, or if I add more, you know, it becomes more of a 50% gray or something. Right now that's probably like 30 still, but so when I say black, you know, it's more variations of gray than anything, okay? And I start off in my darkest of areas. Okay, but I'll come into those shadows that, you know, the things that I've been establishing with all these other darker tones, okay? I'm just going and reiterating it with, you know, darker color here in black. Okay, let's add some of this underneath my trees, you know, for that shadow effect. Kind of anchors them down into the scene. Same thing over here. A really good tool for this is this cosmetic sponge here, or brush. You can kind of just dab that on, and it really goes on very lightly and smoothly for this, you know, perimeter type of application. This brush is an absorbent, so that's why I didn't do the whole thing with this, you know, something like this. Although you certainly could, okay? I don't know if I'd recommend a half page, you know, but like a quarter page one would be okay. When I start doing this, I do start to get a little tired in my shoulder sometimes if I don't really think about it. So I'm trying to keep this in a nice ergonomic position when I'm doing this. I mean, when I'm doing all of my things, but I know I find it especially true with this thing, cosmetic sponge, or I keep saying sponge, cosmetic brush. You can also use cosmetic sponges too. And I've used those in different videos as well. Alright, I'm using this more than I thought I would here. I really like the look, so I said you just kind of have to just go with it, you should start kind of doing your techniques and whatnot. If you like, add a little bit of something, and if you like it, then, add more accordingly. It's kind of framing the scene off very nicely, don't you think? Having these kind of darker edges and perimeters. You see how it's kind of, you darken the edges like here, and it really kind of brings the viewer's attention in even more so, in terms of a focal point and whatnot. Okay. I think I'll add some tone or something like that to that roof. I don't want it all snowy like that, white. Maybe it's a tin roof, or I don't know. I can add, a little tinge of something, which I'll do now. Here's some different brushes, alcohol markers. Okay, these ones are the plumes. Use your whatever brand you have, but see, here's those. Those distress ink colors that I used, you can kind of follow suit with the same type of values and hue in pen form. Especially these days when there's so many different brands out there and values and colors that you can use. This one is a shuttle art. Just kind of adding in some of this brown into these I don't know whether boards, planks. Okay. And going in with different hue, just like we did, everywhere. You can kind of blend over the top of one another. It doesn't have to be, okay, that is this color, and now I'm doing this color in this, different area. Why not mix and match a little bit? Okay, this one's apricot. This one's the Marvy La Plume. Okay, now this one right here, why don't we add, it's a little bit darker, so why don't we add a little bit of, go over some of these little rocks on my road. I'm not coloring the rocks, I'm just kind of getting a little bit of tone at the base of the rock, to kind of create more of a three-dimensional type of look in terms of the opacity. You're seeing that these rocks are casting their little shadow. Some of these boards are different colors. Maybe certain boards have been replaced over the years, maybe, or something of that sort. Here's salmon pink. It's all kind of, you know, it's all roughly the same family of colors, you know, so. You can kind of brighten up some areas if you want to. I mean, this is probably the first time I've ever used this color. But that's just to come to show that you can kind of really mix things around. I wouldn't go too dark with something. I would start off with your lighter values and then kind of work into the darker ones, just like we did with the dye-based inks. But you can really go, you know, and just play around with these. Now, these pens, I bought this in a set of 80 pens for $40, but there's smaller sets, 20 pens for $10. Seems like the more you buy, kind of the cheaper it gets per item. But here's some gray. Remember the grays we used in terms of the London Fog and the Marvy gray? And where did we use that? We used it some, you know, up here in the mountains. So, like up here in the mountains, up in these shadow shaded areas. Let's see, this is a really light shade. But it's kind of good to start off with that lighter one. If you just can't see anything at all, you know, like I'm not sure if I can here, then I'll switch up and I'll go darker. But so what I like about these sets, you know, these sets of pens, you can have, you know, many different values of a given hue, so you can kind of work through them. These real cheap pen sets are, thankfully, courtesy of, you know, the adult coloring book coloring community. So there's a lot of very inexpensive media out there for us to utilize if we want. Okay, going up in the shadows here. This one is a little bit, you know, or quite a bit darker, and it's almost too dark. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of adding this into some of my shadow areas, and some of the areas it leaves too harsh of a line. Okay, so I'm going with the darker one. This is I forgot what color this is. Oh, here it is. Green gray. Okay, and I'll go back with my lighter one now. This one's cool gray. And I'll just kind of blend that green gray out a little bit. So I just use my lighter tone as a blending pen. It's not going to blend out your dye-based inks, it'll blend out the alcohol marker inks. Okay, let's see here. How does it look overall? Oh, okay, we have these rocks down here. Alright, let's go into this pen. Alright, go back in and color in some of these rocks in the middle of the water. We're off on the shore. And you can feel little shadows, maybe along the water line. It's just kind of, I'm going into the shadows, you know, if there's shadows, I don't have to create something just completely from scratch. If there's shadows on the stamp design, you can just kind of reiterate that if you want to. It's a good place to start off. And then you can kind of just do, you know, larger, you know, ideas or concepts, you know, by darkening whole areas as opposed to just reiterating what's on the stamp design. Alright, now here's this lighter one again. Go back in and blend that out a touch. You have to stay extremely precise. I'm joking. As you can see, I'm just kind of going everywhere on here. But just being careful not to just tone out all of my lighting that I've established. Okay, I'm not going to hit up here a lot because I like that variation. But yeah, it's kind of just like little scribbles, and you know, when you're going with something so light, it's not. You don't have to make such a huge commitment to that given hue or value in there. Okay, here's this sky blue. Okay, I'm just kind of going in here and reiterating some of the shadow areas in this blue down here. You know, there's some little areas on the designs that are darker, so I'm just going in there and doing the same thing with the pen. I'm making that darker area darker with my color. If this is sunset and the water was reflecting reds and oranges, I'm not going to use the blue. I'll use reds and oranges down here in my shadow areas, or whatever tone you make your water. Water isn't always bluish, especially if there's all kinds of different colors in the sky where it's reflecting that colored light. Okay, all right. Oh, here's a blue-gray. Kind of blend that a little bit more down here. Again, this is just a very light value, okay? Alright, the fun begins. I'm just joking. The whole thing's fun, but what I was really looking forward to is adding in some real kind of springtime types of touches in here, in the form of some wildflowers. I love doing these little touches, as I'm sure you've noticed if you watched any other videos of mine. I love little details and little finishing touches that can really make a really big difference. Okay, here's this Signo white gel pen. And let's add in these little kind of wildflower types of effects. I'm going to group them a little bit, some ways. Okay, so, or I don't know, grouping, clustering, I guess. Okay. And I say that because I think it looks better that way, to kind of cluster it a little bit. You see that right there? I wouldn't say it looks random, but it just kind of moves away from, too much patterning that we might do. Like, placement, like these dots like 1/4 inch apart perfectly from one another. I think it looks better to have a certain kind of element of I don't know, variation, randomness, whatever you might call it. Okay. So anyways, see what that looks like right down there. It kind of brings that area to life a little bit, doesn't it? And this is what it would look like at arm's distance. It's, you know, it's more subtle, but then you can really tell the difference, you know, when you look close up like that. Alright, let's just keep doing that here. And this, you know, it can really bring some areas to life. Areas that might be rich in terms of tone, but not in terms of a lot of variation in value. These are little white dots, so it really, you know, they really kind of make a statement. Maybe too much in some areas. If it's too dark, maybe I wouldn't put too many of these, you know, in these areas. Like in the darkest of the shadows, maybe we just have something like that. Okay? But it's all up to you. You know, you just kind of, when you start applying this, always kind of take a look at it at arm's distance. Take a look and see how it looks, you know, from that distance, you know, instead of just being focused in so closely, you know, in terms of how you're applying it. It's kind of easy to lose track of the overall. Detailed areas are great, but the kind of the overall picture is, you know, more important. And there's a tackiness to the that alcohol ink, you know, as I put my finger down, pull it up. It's not wet or sticky or anything like that, but there certainly is a little bit of tact to it. Background hills right through the opening of the other side of the bridge. Okay. See, the hills are alive. Alright, let's bring out some highlights and some of those peaks. Some of these peaks are a little bit lighter in terms of the design, right? But I've toned them all out for the most part with at least a really light. So like say something like this, I might add some of this right in those areas and I'll kind of taper it off. These aren't supposed to represent flowers up here, of course, it's just kind of lighting. But just in some of those lighter areas I'll add some of this just for that variation. Okay, so I'll kind of add it a little bit in a thicker application like that, and then I'll kind of taper it off a little bit. Kind of on some of these highest peaks maybe. Yeah. If it's really dark, then I don't add any, because if it's really dark, you're not going to have this kind of reflected light up there in the darkest of areas. But if it's fairly light, I can do this right here without it looking kind of strange. So that's why we leave, you know, some variation when we're doing in our coloring process. toning process. So a little bit of variation on those mountains. See this ridge right here? Let's add a little bit of this white here. Okay. And I'll taper it off a little bit. So that now that ridge stands out a little bit more, and it gives a little bit more depth to that mountain area right here. It brings that peak forward, and it creates depth within that space. Same thing right here. Maybe this is in a little bit more of the shadows, so I'll just add a little bit of a white to that like so. And hopefully that brings that one out. Right here is an opportunity. Maybe it's snow-capped up there, or some glacier, or something like that. Who knows? But that area's, be it ice or whatever, snow is reflecting more light, therefore it is more white. Okay. Alright, so we can do this on some of these rocks as well. We added a little bit of shadow to some. Give this a little bit of lighting on the road. And again, this isn't supposed to represent flowers on the road or something like that, where it's over here. It kind of represents just lighting. So what we have is this similar texture being used in different areas to represent different things. Maybe on this road it's just strictly lighting. In the grass it represents wildflowers. Up in the mountains maybe it represents some snow-capped areas, or perhaps ice and glacial features, maybe, who knows, But that area is kind of reflecting more light that way. Okay, so that was that. Let's bring in some yellow. How about some yellow wildflowers, okay? So you get this nice kind of a spring bloom type of thing with different colored flowers, and again I kind of cluster these together. Hills are alive for sure. Okay. Let me adjust here. I need to adjust my exposure here. Okay. As these scenes get darker and darker, my camera is exposing for the white of the paper down there, but it tends to overexpose, you know, the darker this gets because I've I need to make an adjustment. Alright, so anyways, I'm going kind of crazy here with the amount of flowers that I'm adding in here, but this year is there's been a super bloom in it. The photographs that I'm seeing coming back from various areas, I mean, there is just an explosion of color, and it might be this entire hillside might be just all like, you know, it depends on what kind of flowers are in that given area, you know, but colored, you know, poppies might be orange and whatnot. Yellow is a big one in terms of visuals. Okay, that was orange. I need a brighter. Actually, did I buy a brighter orange? I thought I did. Kind of more of a super bright orange. I don't see it anywhere. But let's see here. I love the look of lupin. Maybe this isn't quite the color, but it'll stand out a little bit more. This is pink. This is pink. Maybe I switch my caps here. Well, this is red. So maybe this is the one they. Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's the one they call pink. Seems more like a violet to me. But this is violet right here. And this is more, I don't know, magenta-y looking or something. Kind of a magenta or violet pink. Alright, so this is supposed to represent like lupin. It's a lot more subtle because it's darker. And especially if I put it into kind of a, you know, similar value, it just kind of disappears. But it could be more subtle. I do like that aspect of it. But it, like right there, I can't, you know, I barely see it. But kind of you hold it up like that, then you kind of see it a little bit more. See right in here and here and here. Sometimes the thickest area of wildflowers is right next to the road. It's because I think the flowers right here get all the water that's washing off from that, where they're not competing with, you know, like area down here. They're competing with all that area around here for the water, but the water kind of washes off right here, so these ones get, like, you know, triple the amount. You see it out there in the deserts too. There's a lot of the trees right next to the road might be bigger or kind of healthier looking, especially in, you know, when we've had years of drought. They're just getting more water than other places, so I kind of like to put a little bit more, you know, right alongside the road. Alright, so down here, let's try some of this. Alright, the hills are definitely alive, that's for sure. It's kind of crazy, it's almost vibrating with color. But that's the way it kind of is out there in some areas right now. It is just kind of sensory, visual sensory. I wouldn't say overload, but you know, definitely stimulating from a visual perspective. I don't know, maybe an emotional perspective too, I don't know. Alright, so that being said, let's go in with some pigment ink. If this is the first scene you've seen me do, I'm using kind of a cotton swab here with some white pigment ink. Not that one. That one's been re-inked and it's really super juicy. Alright, this is the same ink, it's just kind of a drier pad. And I'm just going to start applying some of this, and I see it as more like fog or mist or something like that, but I'm applying this in kind of a dry brush type of effect, so it just kind of adds in a nice soft type of element into the scene. You know, the visual element. Everything right now has been fairly crisp. Maybe I dulled out some of the imagery with, you know, so much color application over the top of it. But for the most part, like, these little flowers are a nice crisp little dot, you know. My imagery has been stamped out nice and crisp, you know, crisp impressions. That's what you want from them, but from a textural standpoint, sometimes there's a lot of the same thing going on in terms of the lack of variation, you know, between sharp and soft within a given space. So I happen to like variation, so I like to add in these little elements like this and to kind of diffuse. It's like you're diffusing light, but you're just kind of, you know, you're knocking down the value of certain impressions or areas within the impression, okay? So I like it. I don't like everything just soft everywhere. I like it to be varied. So let's say right down here, I'll add a little bit of this pigment ink, but I won't add it everywhere in here because that would be monotonous. So if you don't do it everywhere, but put it some places, then you get variation. Okay, so you can kind of see that it's like mist or kind of like fog coming off of the surface of the water. Okay, see this mill back here? Maybe there's some little bit of a mist or fog coming from, you know, the water and rising and kind of diffusing some of that watermill a little bit. Maybe there's some kind of mist coming from the background out here, so see that? I kind of apply some of it back there, and that kind of has that little mist creeping into that covered bridge. Is that kind of fun like that? Trees at the base, maybe, or some trees, not all of them, maybe, I don't know. Something like that. Watch these mountaintops, mountain peaks, okay? Sometimes there can be like a cloud coming through, so, or something like that, just some atmosphere. So I can kind of knock this one down right here a little bit, or knock it down a lot, right? And that pushes that mountain back in the distance, and it brings this one forward, you know, by not having it on both of them. See, I can kind of knock that down a little bit, and it becomes lighter, and when it becomes lighter, it looks like it's farther back in the distance. Okay, maybe some, you know, there's some lighting hitting some of these peaks over here, or there's some kind of spindrift, you know, coming off of the top. Or it's just far away, you know, where the imagery isn't as crisp anymore, maybe. Who knows? It's just, there's variation. Maybe there's a little bit of fog around here. Kind of makes it a little bit more dreamy too by adding this. That's why in movies they always have that fog machine rolling on. There's always fog or mist kind of, you know, in the background of something, especially if they're out and come amongst some trees. Is that kind of distant peak? It looks a lot more distant now than this one right here because it's coated with pigment ink. It was stamped out all the same, you know, black. But now it looks a little bit different. Sometimes I put too much, that's why I'm kind of dabbing it off with my finger, by the way. Trying to add some in back of these trees right here to make that kind of tree stand out a little bit more. Okay, I think that should just about do it. With this water down here, and got a few little shimmering, reflective points of light in there. Okay, anyway, there's a scene. I colored it a lot more than I thought. I really like the way things are going, so I don't know, I added a ton of color on here. But anyway, there is my Hills Are Alive or whatever title. We should give it a lot of texture and color variations, but there's a lot of similar colors, okay? You know, a lot of those tones from up here are in here, and these tones from right here are all throughout this. I didn't bring greens and browns into the blue down here, but or up in the sky, but all of these different areas do share a lot of similar colors throughout the different, I guess, objects and zones here, but the big thing is that there's variation, that we have lights and darks up in our sky, right? There's lights and darks in the mountain, lights and darks within this meadow, within the water, the close bank, And even on those little, those boards up there on the covered bridge, you can see that, how I've colored them a little bit differently. I didn't just see that like little triangle there to be done the exact same hue and value. So some of them are a little bit lighter and some of them are a little bit darker, just, for that variation. And I think that adds to the visual potential richness of a given scene. And that's what I would suggest. And when you do something like that, when you add variation to certain areas, that pretty much is the thing that will define your lighting within your scene, okay? Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do more or you have to know more. It just means you have to color less. So if you're working through light, medium, and dark tones, the darker tones are just kind of more, in the shadow areas, okay, or on the perimeters of things. You just don't color in that brown over here all throughout that, so it just means you have to do less a lot of times. A lot of times people will bring in light, medium, darks, and they'll color in this whole thing because they say, here's this road, I need to color in the exact same way. So here's light, medium, dark, instead of going light, medium, and then dark here, okay? And that's the difference between kind of having a more flat looking surface and one that seems more dimensional, because you're just saying that light is hitting it into different areas. Okay, so a little bit of lighter here, darker out here. And again, you can just take your cues from the designs itself. I didn't, the lighter areas on the mountain up here are largely the areas on the design that are lighter, and the areas that are darker that I've colored in with darkness, those are the ones that, those are the areas of the design that are darker inherently. So you can just kind of follow suit like that, or at least those guides can give you a head start in terms of areas that you can address in terms of creating your lighting scheme. All right, so a lot of fun here with the gel pens too, and it got a little bit too crazy, so we've just diffused them a little bit with some pigment ink here and there. And again, it's not everywhere. It's just kind of, spatterings of it here and there. Just to diffuse it a little bit and to create a little bit of textural variation. All right, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. And as always, if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and leave them down below.